Mockumentaries are exactly what you think they are: fake documentaries. Not to be confused with found footage, these are films that show fictional events, but are presented in the style of a documentary. They do occasionally blur the line when including footage, but then they return to the documentary structure. When I was looking into the history of the genre, I originally thought the first mockumentary was Punishment Park from 1971, which is a brutal alternate history mockumentary. Turns out there were many before even that. The first one I could find was the 1933 Spanish mockumentary Land Without Bread, which has an interesting history I might cover in the future. While there's been numerous mockumentary films and even TV shows over the years, they don't match the numbers or popularity of found footage. Although that's not to say that one genre is better than the other, just that one is more popular than the other. Here's 5 mockumentaries you probably overlooked. Europa Report. Europa Report is a 2013 mockumentary directed by Sebastian Cordero. This one is really unique because it's a fairly hard sci-fi mockumentary. It tells the story of a crew of astronauts who are on a mission to investigate Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. They have reason to believe that the moon has life and are sent there to try to find evidence. The movie goes back and forth between footage of the crew and a narrator discussing the events. As the story unfolds, it shows the events that occurred on the mission in a fairly serious way. The whole thing plays out like you're watching a news report. For inspiration, the crew watched real footage from the International Space Station and any other real space footage they could find. They worked to try to make this look and feel as authentic as possible. The effects were a mixture of miniatures and CG, which was really impressive, even more so knowing that the budget for this was quite low. They managed to make space travel interesting and exciting without the need to have aliens and laser battles. The film got a small theatrical release in August of 2013, but most people saw it on video on demand or Blu-ray, which came out a short while later. Incident at Loch Ness. Incident at Loch Ness is a 2004 mockumentary written and directed by Zach Penn. It's about a crew working on a documentary called Enigma of Loch Ness that focused on award-winning director Werner Herzog trying to uncover the mystery of the Loch Ness Monster. The mockumentary starts to change as the writer tries to alter the film to make it something more marketable, doing things like incorporating Hollywood cliches and adding comedic relief. The crux of the film falls on the arguments between Herzog and Penn, with the story of Loch Ness as the backdrop. The movie becomes a film within a film. Penn has a fake Nessie made to try to fool everyone, but things go sideways when they begin to encounter something they think may be the real Loch Ness Monster. The writer and director are at each other's throats, and it feels like watching something that absolutely has happened on other productions. When the movie was announced, Penn had told numerous outlets that this was a real film, and it was reported on as such. Since Herzog has helmed over 30 documentaries, most people, including critics, took this at face value and assumed that they were telling the truth and it was real, not a mockumentary. This is further pushed by some of the people involved, like Jeff Goldblum and Crispin Glover playing themselves. The line between what was real and what was fake completely baffled audiences. Critics generally enjoyed it, and it went on to win the New American Cinema Award at the 2004 Seattle International Film Festival. I'm not sure how much the budget was, but if I had to guess, I'd say it was about $350. Fear of a Black Hat. In 1984, This Is Spinal Tap was released. It was a mockumentary about a fictional rock band, Spinal Tap. At the time, rock was huge, and this was capitalizing on that. Roughly a decade later, rap, or more specifically, gangster rap, was taken over. As such, the mockumentary Fear of a Black Hat was born. The title's a play on the 1990 album Fear of a Black Planet by Public Enemy. The film's about a documentary crew following the evolution of a rap group, NWH. They lampoon just about every facet of gangster rap, from the numerous rappers using ice in their name, to the over-sexualized lyrics. To promote the movie, they made a parody video that lampooned Snoop Doggy Dogg with Ice Froggy Frog.
Is that frog in here? Is that frog in here? You!
The movie was written, directed, and starred Rusty Cundiff. It premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in January of 1993. It was most likely going to get a wide theatrical release, but roughly 2 months later, the mockumentary CB4 hit theaters, which was essentially the same idea. The two movies are fairly different though, and each one is worth seeing on its own. Although I personally prefer CB4, Fear of a Black Cat is still worth checking out. It's a little bit more raw than CB4 was. So while critics loved the film, it had a tiny release. It only appeared in 5 theaters, and then was quietly placed on home video in 1994. Unfortunately, with CB4 coming out in 1993 and this coming out in 1994, most people thought this was a ripoff when really, it slightly predated it. It's just another case of two separate movies being made at the same time that are unaware of the other. You'd be surprised at how often this happens. While the movie underperformed, it did get the director a lot of attention, which led to him being able to helm the horror satire Tales from the Hood. Big Man Japan. Big Man Japan is a mockumentary about a Japanese citizen who can grow to a giant if exposed to high voltage electricity. This is something passed down from his ancestors, and he's the sole protector of Japan from the numerous monsters that attack it from time to time. Even though he is the protector, most people in Japan don't like him, and say he does just as much damage as the monsters do. The film was written, directed, and stars Japanese comedian Hitoshi Matsumoto. It was made as a way to lampoon the overwhelming amount of giant monster movies. They presented that this is just what it's like to live in Japan. Every now and then, a giant monster attacks, and it's up to Big Man Japan and later another hero to try to stop them. It's a very funny satire, not only on kaiju movies, but also on Japanese culture. The movie was released in Japan in 2007, it had a limited theatrical release in the US in 2008, and was released on DVD about a year later in 2009. Completely missing the point, Hollywood had opted to remake this film in the US, but thankfully, that seems to have fallen through as there hasn't been any news about this since 2011. Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon. This is an odd one. Behind the Mask starts off as a mockumentary, but it incorporates elements of found footage and even narrative film. The movie is a mockumentary where slasher movies are real. Jason Voorhees, Freddy Krueger, and so on are something that is well known in this world and strikes fear into the hearts of everyone. The movie focuses on a documentary crew following around a guy named Leslie Vernon. He's a serial killer who's trying to make a name for himself alongside the great ones. He's planning his first big score, and the crew is there to follow how he's setting the whole thing up. We see how he chooses his victims, what he does when he isn't killing people, and a look into the story that explains his history. They're documenting his rise to fame as he puts together his plans to go on a killing spree of a bunch of teenagers who are meeting at a farm that's supposed to be cursed. It shows how all the setups in the movies work. He blocks exits, messes with the lights, plans on where he's going to leave the bodies for the others to find, and so on. It pokes fun at the cliches of slasher films while also presenting them in a reverent way. The people who worked on this genuinely have a love of the genre and are presenting it in a way that embraces the cliches and still makes it feel like something completely new. When the mockumentary pivots to the movie portion, it happens in a way that you don't even notice. Not to spoil anything, and I won't, but when we finally get to the big killing spree, it does not go how you think it will. To tie it in with some horror royalty, it has cameos from Zelda Rubinstein, Kane Hodder, and Robert Englund has a small part. There's also a ton of little homages, in-jokes, and references in the film. The movie premiered at South by Southwest in 2006 and was later released by Anchor Bay in 2007. While audiences who did see it loved it, it generally was overlooked at the time. They tried to crowdfund a sequel in 2012 on Kickstarter, but it only made about half of its goal. Not enough people were aware of it to get that groundswell of support it needed. While the movie didn't happen, they didn't give up and were able to crowdfund a 6-issue comic book series that covered the history of Leslie Vernon and many of the things that would have been in the sequel. In 2017, the director said that the script they now had was outdated due to how horror films had changed since the first film. If they ever do end up being able to make another, they most likely will have to make an entirely new script revolving around whatever the horror market is doing at the time. Shout Factory acquired the rights and released it on Blu-ray in 2018 with a slew of extras. I think too many people saw the cover and assumed it was just another slasher, when really, it's so much more than that. If you're a horror fan and haven't seen this one, watch it immediately. Well, that's a nice bunch of mockumentaries. There's plenty of these out there that are really worth seeing. I'm just scratching the surface of overlooked movies, so expect more to come in the future.